Alright guys, welcome to Math 0314, section 5.6, application of rational equations and proportions. And so, what we're going to talk about today, first off, are proportions, and what I want to do is first illustrate the common method of doing this, and then illustrate why this method works. So the common method for doing this is that we do something called cross multiplication. If you recall this from middle school, we call this cross multiplying. What we do is you take your corners basically and you multiply them together. Sometimes this is called the butterfly method. And from here, what we do is most people will actually multiply this together. I actually don't think you need to. I would divide through by 5. Okay. The reason why I said you don't need to multiply through is because it's very easy to take on 95 divided by 5. And since you're multiplying, and you're always going to multiply and divide when you cross multiply, it doesn't make sense to make a number really big and then divide through by that. Instead, what makes more sense is to tackle 95 divided by 5. And most people don't know what 95 divided by 5 is off the top of their head, but they do know 20 divided by 5 is, 20 divided by 5, let me put this, 100 divided by 5 is 20. So if 100 divided by 5 is 20, then that means 95 divided by 5 is 1 less. So again, we said 100 divided by 5 is 20, so that means 95 divided by 5 has to be 19. And I'm left with y is equal to 19 times 19. Now, you can do this the old school way of multiplying by 19 times 19, but we've recently discussed the difference of squares, which is a squared minus b squared equals a plus b times a minus b. And a very cool application of this is that if I add b squared to the other side, I can use this to easily solve anytime you have to square a number. So what I mean by that is if I want to know what 19 squared is, I just plug in 19 plus b times 19 minus b plus b squared. So the question emerges, well, what then is b? Okay, well, you can pick what b is, and so I'm going to pick 1 because that would give me 20, which is easy to multiply by, and I'm going to subtract 1, which is going to give me 18. And then all I have to do is add, 1 squared. So 20 times 18 is not that bad. It's 18 times 2 is 36, so this would be 360 plus 1. 1 squared is 1, and this would give me 361. And that would be my answer. Another way of thinking about this, and I think visually this helps, is that anytime you square a number, if you can bounce it up or down to an easy number, multiply these two numbers together, and then add whatever you've bounced it up squared, and you'll get the answer. So very cool application of the difference of squares. But the big thing that we want to stress here is what cross multiplying really is. And so let me rewrite this. This was 5 over 19 equals 95y. And so what cross multiplying really is that you're multiplying through by the common denominator, which is 19y. And notice that if we multiply through by 19y, the 19's divide out here, and the y's divide out here. And so that would leave you with 5y and 95 times 19, which is this right here. So, very cool thing about cross multiplication is that it is just what we've always been preaching, which is get rid of the fractions as soon as possible. I know it's a long-winded way of cross multiplying, but pretty straightforward. Let me create another example real fast. I feel like we need to practice one. So this is, I'm just making up numbers real fast. This is another great quick example of how to cross multiply. So like I said, you just multiply these two and these two together. So you get 2 times 4 equals 3x. Then we just divide by 3. So here nothing divides out, so we're left with 8 over 3 is x. And there's your answer. Super useful. And most people use this notation, though really all we're doing is we're getting rid of the denominators again, right? 3 times 4, 3 times 4. Here, the 3's go away, and you're left with 4 and 2, which is what we have here. And here the 4's go away with, and you're left with 3 and x, which is what we have here. So what this section, though, is really talking about is solving word problems that deal with proportions. So let's take a look at this. It says the ratio of cats to dogs at an animal shelter is 8 to 5. So what I want you to do is, it doesn't matter what the question is really asking me at this point. I always, when you see a word problem, I want you to write the relevant information as you read it. So we have cats to dogs, and we know the ratio is 8 to 5. And what's very important is to make sure you allocate and mark correctly cats to dogs, because as you read a question, a lot of information that you're digesting at once, and sometimes it becomes very hard to know what goes with what. So cats on top, dogs on the bottom. How many dogs in the facility? So I'm going to put D for dogs in a facility if there are 400 cats. And we have 400 here. So once you set it up, we know how to cross multiply. We're going to multiply this and this together. We get 8D equals 5 times 400. Again, I'm not going to multiply 5 times 400. That's not difficult to do. I know that's 2,000, but I think it makes a whole lot more sense to leave it as the such. And hopefully you know the answer why, which is 8 goes into 40 5 times, so we are left with 5 times 50, which is 250. And there's our answer. Also, what I always recommend doing is after you finish a question, reread it. How many dogs are in the facility? That's what I solved for. There's the answer. So always reread the question and make sure you're answering what the question's asking for. Moving right along. Number 3, the ratio of male to female officers is 11 to 3. If the total officers is 112, so let me start writing this out. So we have male, and I'm going to put M for male, F for female, and they said is 11 to 3, male to female, 11 to 3. Okay. Now this is something different. It says if the total number of officers is 112, so we know total is M plus F is 112. How many male officers and how many female officers are there? So this is very interesting because what I have right now is I don't have another proportion like in the previous question. So the question that is to be asked then is, well, what can I do to solve? Well, there's a number of things that we can do here. The thing that pops into my head most to do, though, is to cross multiply. And you might pause and think, hey, well, why is he cross multiplying? And the answer is, if you don't know what to do, then play with the problem, right? Number one. But what I'm actually going to do is create, if I have, this is an equation technically, and this is an equation. If you have two equations, then we know we can always isolate a variable and take that value and substitute it in. So now I'm left with 11f over 3 plus f is 112. And we know how to deal with fractions. We multiply through by the denominator. Make sure you distribute into everything. And we're left with 11f plus 3f equals 112 times 3. Again, I leave it as 112 times 3 because if I can clean it up without multiplying through, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So 11 and 3 gives me 14. So this is 14f equals 112 times 3. I'm then going to divide through by 14. And f is going to equal what? Well, I don't know exactly how many times 14, if it goes into 112, how many times it does, but I do know that both of these are divisible by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. 112 divided by 2 may seem daunting, but it's actually pretty easy because you know 100 divided by 2 is 50. 12 divided by 2 is 6, so this breaks down to 56. Let me show that again. So if I have 112 divided by 2, what I'm really doing is breaking it down to two easy numbers to divide by 2. And it gives me 56. So the other nice thing, and I'm running out of space here, I can't move on, so I'm going to go ahead and finish it off here. 7 goes into 56 8 times, so now I'm left with 8 times 3, which is 24. And the fantastic thing about that is that I didn't need a calculator. And honestly, once you get comfortable, that goes by very quickly. So huge numbers don't stay huge if you just keep slicing them up. Now let's look at the next bit. F is 24, but the question is asking, actually the question is how many males and how many females? So again, I said F was 24. So if F is 24, this equation here is the easiest one to substitute back into. So I'm left with 11 times 24 over 3, and this will give me 88 males. And there's my answer. So 88 males, 24 females, and we got the answer. One last example. This is very common. I call these X's, but I really should call it a different letter. Let's call it Y. Okay. What this is essentially saying is if this angle and this angle are the same, this is not in this course, but it's nice to know that the sum of the angles of a triangle, any triangle, this is called a right triangle because it has a 90-degree angle, but the sum of the angles of any triangle is 180 degrees, which means that if this angle and this angle and this angle and this angle are the same, this angle and this angle have to match up as well, because they would just be 180 minus this and this, or 180 minus this and this. With that being said, when all the angles match up, we have what's called a proportion. So this means that this region here is proportional to this, and this region here is proportional to this. So what I can do is I can say 3 over 2 is equal to x over 11. And there are a lot of different ways of writing this. Cross multiply, you get 3 times 11 equals 2 times x. Finishing this off, divide through, chose the wrong color. Divide through by 2. And we're left with, so nothing goes in, so we're left with 33 over 2 is x. And that's it. So kind of short section, but you should be comfortable with setting up word problems, reading word for word. That's the big issue. And then also cross multiplying, which hopefully isn't too bad. All right, guys. So hopefully this wasn't too bad. See you in the next video.